You've conquered red. You've mastered blue. You've triumphed over yellow. You've caught them all. And now you're ready for the next step. Welcome to the world of Pokemon Gold and Silver.
November 1999 was 1 month before the turn of the millennia. Electronic Gaming Monthly releases their 124th edition of their magazine. The 80s and 90s weren't rife with internet forums, YouTube, and other platforms, so people got their gaming information from friends, commercials, and most importantly, magazines. Magazines and strategy guides are now collectibles, but back then they were one of the greatest lenses into the goings-ons of video games. This 1999 edition's focus is on Pokemon. A quick look at the amount of units sold on video games from the 90s shows a clear grip by Nintendo on the market, but more importantly, it shows a mania for Pokemon. At the time of the article's release, Pokemon Red, Green, and Blue were the highest sold video games of the 90s, and the article's focus, Pokemon Gold and Silver, would become the second highest sold video game of the 90s. The article's headline, Why Pokemaniacs Have Spent $5 billion on it so far.
Top-rated TV show, Pokemon is an undeniable obsession with children across the country. The upcoming Pokemon the First movie recently caused such a frenzy that the switchboard at Warner Brothers was flooded with 70,000 calls a minute.
Deep within Nintendo headquarters, expert game counselors answer your questions. Their source of information, Nintendo Power.
Gaming magazines were like any other magazine. Electronic Gaming Monthly 124 wasn't just solely about Pokemon. With smaller sections such as Stop Bitching About Bias, a section addressing fan mail regarding bias towards consoles, it also came with other large headlines. On page 44, the article begins, September 13 began with an earthquake rocking Tokyo. That night, Sony rocked Japan in a different way. Boasting a high-capacity 8MB memory card at $33 US, it was the next-generation console capable of producing a much larger amount of polygons than Final Fantasy VII. The PlayStation 2 already had developers lining up to create games, many of the developers still strong as of 2021. Atlus, Capcom, Chunsoft, now Spike Chunsoft, EA, Square, and Enix, now merged to Square Enix, Ubisoft, Activision, Konami, LucasArts, and many others were participating as part of the PlayStation 2's eventual launch in early 2000. This article, like many others of its time, also continued a plethora of titles and games that would later be changed or dropped. Super Mario RPG 2 later became Paper Mario, Mother 3 originated as a 3D game, later becoming a 2D cult classic, and The Legend of Zelda Fruit of the Mysterious Tree appears to have dropped out of existence. Mother 3 remains relevant even today as fans of the game continue to beg Nintendo to translate the game into English officially. So much history is packed into these monthly magazines, and all of this only from a single edition from November 1999. Picking out the most important games is impossible. Even throughout the 90s and early 2000s, players were split amongst their separate groups. PC gamers, Nintendo gamers, console gamers, RPG or role-playing game fans, shooter fans, competitive gamers. These are all groups that emerged early on within the mass popularity of video games. Electronic Gaming Monthly issue 94 touts Final Fantasy VII as the best RPG ever. Yet, despite its massive impact, it can also be argued games like Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VI, or Earthbound are just as impactful or even better games, even though they were released earlier. That's just competition amongst one type of RPG, specifically the JRPG or Japanese RPG. The Western RPG market would boom in the late 90s with releases such as Baldur's Gate, Fallout, Diablo 2, Shadowrun, Planescape, Torment. All of these games are still considered some of the best of all time, even 20 years later. Once you increase your scope from one little snippet of the gaming world or one snippet of time, the world of video games is incredibly vast. Like movies, television, cartoons, anime, comics, novels, you can't experience it all. Questions like what is the best RPG are impossible to answer, even if you narrow the scope to a specific time period, because everyone's experiences with RPGs, the impacts they've had on their lives and their friends' lives and the world around them are different. It's also impossible to even get an accurate sense of the entire gaming world, unless it's looked through at a lens of extreme specificity. Learning everything about the world of RPGs in the 90s is just as daunting as learning everything about the history of video games in 1999. The video game industry presently is a behemoth, but for decades, it has been growing rapidly and captivating audiences of hundreds, then thousands, then millions.
Beautiful graphics at 10 special areas, and of course, Mario. Move an incredible 360 degrees as you embark on Mario's greatest adventure.